In 2023, Ukrainian forces will likely attempt another major counteroffensive operation, attempting to cut off Russia's land bridge at a time and place of their choosing. But do Ukrainian forces have the combat power necessary, and what tactics will Russia use to try to repel the attack? Recently leaked US intelligence reports paint a difficult picture of the challenges ahead. This video will be an around-the-horn analysis of the different locations on the front line where Ukraine may launch an offensive and the challenges that they're up against in each location. I'm going to be careful not to mention any sensitive information about Ukrainian forces' exact location or numbers on this video. And the reason for this is because the counteroffensive has not happened yet. And so I've made sure all the information is already widely published and trailing by at least a week. First of all, let's look at the north and eastern stretches of the front line. Ukrainian forces have been battling along a front line here since the counteroffensive front line stabilized in October of 2022. Ukraine managed to take control of the eastern bank of the Oskil River. This was an important move on Ukraine's part because it forced the Russian forces to fall back to their next closest supply lines after that river. The frontline battles are now focused here on the stretch from the village of Tavozanka in the northeast and down to the city of Savtov in the center, and then to the city of Crimea in the south. We can see this is where Russian forces have access to several paved roads that run from Russia to these cities. There are several reasons why it might make sense for Ukraine to have a new counteroffensive in the same exact location as last year. The Russian units here could be badly battered. They could have trouble building defensive lines during this time. But during the month of November 2022, we saw very little territorial changes here due to the nature of the muddy terrain slowing down any of Ukraine's armored assaults at this location. At the same time, this pause gave Russia time to reorganize to some degree here. A lot of Russian defensive lines here in northern Luhansk Oblast became reinforced with thousands of newly mobilized Russian reservists and conscripts throughout the month of November. However, by early December, Ukraine had managed to advance slightly here. One of the ways Russia is trying to mitigate these 101 newbie problems is by releasing official cartoon training videos that show troops the correct way to build trenches and defensive positions. It's an odd cartoon style. Kind of reminds me of the old World War II training videos, mixed with like a Fallout 3 video game aesthetic. Wait a second, what is this? I'm pretty sure Deadpool would be on the Ukrainian side, not fighting with the Russians. On the other side, Reuters reported how 40,000 new Ukrainian soldiers were specially trained as part of a storm assault unit, with each new trooper taking 4 months to train from civilian to grunt. It's easier to herd cats than to teach thousands of new soldiers how to coordinate, communicate, and maneuver under fire. Their forces have grown from 260,000 at the start of the war to 1 million today. According to the New York Times, Ukraine Military Command has been holding back their most elite soldiers and saving them from the worst of the fighting in Bakhmut so they could throw them into the offensive campaign instead as a kind of ace in the hole. But by far the most interesting piece delivered to Ukraine for the spring offensive is the 8 AVLBS, or the Armored Bridge Building Vehicles. They're designed to accompany armored columns and assist with crossing otherwise impassable terrain, helping armor to move in a more unpredictable way. They can enable offensive progress to be made even in the event of a bridge being blown up. They can also help armor avoid choke points by subverting them via otherwise impassable terrain. Ukraine armor will be helpful in pushing through Russian defensive, but if they can effectively employ combined arms tactics, the likelihood of success of the operation is significantly improved. The US has been training Ukrainian forces in combined arms warfare, but only in small numbers. Currently, 1 battalion of 650 men have been through the training in southern Germany, with a few battalions more to be trained by the end of March. Conducting a combined arms approach to such an offensive would greatly enhance the combat effectiveness of Ukrainian forces. But the fact that only a limited number of offensive forces will be purposely trained in this fashion limit the training to the tactical level. The leaked US intelligence documents also paint a picture of poor conditions of Putin's soldiers. According to US human intelligence, Russian soldiers face lower morale thanks to major strategic blunders that led to tremendous casualties and situations where soldiers were extremely poorly equipped. In fact, the document specifically states that the soldiers located in this location here are equipped the worst, with substandard camouflaging of their artillery pieces, and the way that they store their ammunition is horrible, and they've been keeping it too closely to where they shelter. One of the main Russian units fighting here is the 144th Guard Motor Rifle Division. region. They reportedly lost around half of their original strength of 200 T-80 tanks during the Ukrainian counteroffensive last year. They had the objective to prevent Ukraine from crossing the Oskil River, but failed at that goal and lost their commander in the process, who was wounded and needed to be evacuated. According to Western estimates, approximately 100,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed or wounded in action. The CSIS estimates Russian soldiers have suffered 250,000 casualties since the start of the war. The fighting going on this front is referred to as the Savtov-Kreminna line, and it's estimated each side has 15,000 soldiers fighting here. Notably, the first confirmed destruction of a Russian BMP-T Terminator happened here with photographic evidence to back up the claim. The Russian winter offensive here was able to gain minor territory, and now both sides are kind of stuck in their entrenched positions for the time being. Russian forces have created strong defensive lines along this front over the winter. According to the Institute for the Study of War, Russian military command has fully committed elements of several conventional divisions to offensive operations along the Savtov-Kreminna line. One of the aspects I had not strongly considered prior to the release of the leaked US intelligence documents is the massive minefields Russia has set up in anticipation of Ukrainian forces. This problem will plague every direction of assault no matter where it happens. The success of the counteroffensive will be tied to Ukraine's ability to cross this obstacle. They already have their own mine-clearing vehicles, but a lot of them are Soviet era and out of date. They've also captured mine-clearing vehicles and equipment from Russians who, when they were retreating, they left theirs in place. On top of all of this, Ukrainian forces have also recently been given many special mine-clearing vehicles sent from the West, and a lot of the tanks and strikers that we've covered have been given mine-clearing technology added onto them. So what about the eastern part of the country, which is made up of roughly between the cities of Severodonetsk and the Donetsk region, including Bakhmut? Could Ukraine choose to counterattack here instead? In this location, Ukrainian forces are currently on the defensive, and there's a huge concentration of Russian troops, estimated to be 40,000 strong. Furthermore, the Donbas region has been fortified for years since the conflict that erupted in 2014 here. There are existing layers of trenches and pillboxes installed in this region. The area has only been further reinforced since the war began. For example, ABC News analysis of satellite imagery saw new trenches being dug south of Luhansk Oblast last October. But I wouldn't count this direction out as a possibility. The local conditions here may be in Ukraine's favor since Russian forces have lost approximately 30,000 soldiers here and are weakened in this area. Over the past year, Ukraine's strategic goals have shifted from mere survival to the ambitious objective of recovering all lost territory. This new approach has been repeatedly emphasized by President Zelensky, who declared in his speech to the US Congress that we can return the Ukrainian flag to our entire territory. We can do it with the force of arms. This pursuit of territorial gains not only strengthens Ukraine's negotiating position, but also boosts morale among the Ukrainian population and armed forces. By retaking control of territory, Ukraine is not only reclaiming its sovereignty, but also sending a strong message to Russia and the international community that this is far from defeat. In addition to its territorial objectives, Ukraine is also facing pressure from its Western allies to launch a successful counteroffensive. The outcome of the conflict on the battlefield is crucial for demonstrating that the war is not at a stalemate, nor is it tilting in Russia's favor. It is therefore imperative for Ukraine to show that the offensive weaponry it receives from its allies is having a tangible impact in helping to retake lost territory. There is, of course, no guarantee this assault will take place, but it has been strongly hinted at in recent months, especially with the nature of the tanks and troop transport vehicles sent by the West to Ukrainian forces. The Washington Post reported recently leaked United States intelligence documents detail some of the challenges Ukraine is having with this new counteroffensive, which are similar to the problems that Russia had in their own winter offensive, which failed to gain significant territory. Among the top concerns are shortages in ammunition and limitations in air defense systems. The US intelligence document states the potency of entrenched Russian defenses, coupled with enduring Ukrainian deficiencies in training and munition supplies, probably will strain progress and exacerbate casualties during the offensive. They go on to state that the Ukrainians' main goal in their counteroffensive is to sever the land bridge, and that US estimates are that they will not be successful in this attempt, possibly. We always have to take reports with a grain of salt because, as we know, the US assessments before the war were that Ukraine would be completely occupied by Russia within 3 days. And that was not correct. But the NSA and CIA have learned a lot since then, and they're paying more attention to this region than they were before. So US assessments being wrong in the past does not necessarily mean that they're going to be wrong again. A Ukrainian military official said to the Washington Post, "Everyone knows we're low on ammunition. The president and the defense minister talk about that openly. And it's been obvious to everyone since November that the next counteroffensive will be focused on the south, first in Melitopol, and then Bryansk. But the exact place we can change the week before." US officials have been holding tabletop exercises with Ukrainian military leaders to wargame out different offensive scenarios that we're going to go through each one of these in the video. The main concern appears to be the negative consequences of spreading forces too thin and stretching supply lines too far. Even if the territory is retaken, it could be hard to hold on to. A senior Ukrainian military official who spoke to the Washington Post said he didn't deny the challenges that they were up against and pointed to the fact that the delivery of Western tanks and weapons had been delayed, and this is the reason why they might not recapture the land bridge. The most likely location that everyone agrees for a Ukrainian counteroffensive would be along the southern stretch of the front line, with Melitopol or Mariupol seeming to be some of the most feasible targets. The seizure of these lands would sever Putin's land bridge to Crimea and would dangerously threaten Russian forces in the west. While it's possible that Ukraine could assault the Kherson region directly, it might not play to their strengths. Russian forces have been dug in behind the Dnipro River since last year, making an assault from Kherson possibly difficult. The Russian army has been fortifying the roads leading to Crimea from Kherson. This has been a strategic priority for them. They've spent considerable resources towards preventing a Ukrainian assault in this direction. There have been recent developments that hint that the offensive could occur from this direction. Somewhere around mid to late April, Ukrainian units began to set up advanced position on the eastern bank of the river near Kherson. This information is according to Russian military bloggers themselves, like Rybar, who claimed that on April 20th, Ukrainian forces successfully landed on the left bank of the Dnipro River, establishing positions west of the Anatovsky Bridge. Rybar says that these soldiers even set up stable supply lines to their forward positions. According to the Mill blogger, Russia controls the land about 1.5 kilometers behind the Anatovsky Bridge. According to the Institute for the Study of War, Russian military bloggers seem to agree with the idea that Ukraine will launch a southern offensive with a target of either Mariupol in the very south of the Donetsk Oblast or somewhere in the Zaporizhia Oblast. Western theorists have similarly stated that a southern offensive is probably the best option for Ukraine. For example, Colonel Mark Kanankin, a senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, expects a Ukrainian offensive to target the Zaporizhia region. An offensive in Zaporizhia may aim to advance to the Sea of Azov, while seizing control of key supply routes and urban centers. This would entail Ukrainian forces needing to advance as far as 100 kilometers from current positions to seize key supply routes like the M14 and E105 highways. However, 100 kilometers is quite a distance, and Ukraine would need to overcome strong opposition from Russian forces who've been fortifying the region with trenches and other defensive in anticipation. Recent reports from the British Ministry of Defense indicate that Russia's increasing defensive fortifications in the region, amid fears of Ukrainian offensive and satellite images, provide more evidence showing a significant concentration of defensive positions have already been established in Zaporizhia. Berdyansk and Melitopol are key urban centers that are heavily fortified and defended by Russian forces. Seizing these cities would be a difficult and costly endeavor unless Russian forces retreat as they did in Kherson. However, if Ukrainian forces can successfully take control of these cities, they could effectively drive a wedge between Russian forces in the east and west, achieving their primary objective. There have been new reports that Ukrainian forces may be conducting probing attacks in Zaporizhia region, according to some Russian sources. If these reports are true, it provides more evidence that the spring counteroffensive is seeking to retake Zaporizhia. These probing attacks could serve as a way for Ukrainian forces to test the strength of Russian defenses in the area, as well as to gather intelligence on potential targets and weaknesses. However, it's important to note that these reports have not been independently verified, and the situation on the ground remains fluid and unpredictable. Apart from Zaporizhzhia, there are other plausible locations where an offensive may take place, such as the aforementioned Mariupol. Some Russian military bloggers have opted that the main Ukrainian attack will aim to take Mariupol over a more westerly target. The port city is about 80 kilometers from the front line and sits on the coast of the Sea of Azov. Capturing Mariupol would be a symbolic victory for Ukraine, given that it was the site of one of the most famous battles early in the war. However, how much of the city's infrastructure is left standing affects the value of taking the target. The UN estimates about 90% of the city was destroyed in the siege last year, and even more was bulldozed as Russia has begun to transform Mariupol into a model Russian city. Russia has rebuilt some areas rapidly and has established a military base here. But many elements of key infrastructure are likely not operational, which diminishes Mariupol's value as a target somewhat. Furthermore, the city is further away from Ukraine's next likely target, Kherson Oblast. Mariupol is also a closer proximity to the bulk of Russian forces in the east, which might make it easier for them to reinforce and resupply here. Despite the option of Mariupol, the evidence supporting a Ukrainian spring offensive with Zaporizhzhia as a target is simply more compelling. It's possible that Ukraine might use a secondary offensive to pin down Russian forces elsewhere. The Institute for the Study of War has demonstrated that some Russian military bloggers claim Ukraine has enough combat power to launch a second offensive, either in another southern area or along the northeastern Kharkiv Oblast. A second offensive would tie down Russian forces, preventing Russia from committing more to Ukraine's main attack. However, Ukraine may not be able to carry this out. Currently, there are about 17,000 Russian forces divided into two formations deployed along the southern border to Belarus at the border with Ukraine. This is according to Ukrainian commander of Joint Forces statement on April 25th. An additional 2,800 Russians are training in the rear in Belarus. This mass of soldiers is reportedly not enough of a combat power to launch an offensive, but they are likely there to make Kyiv hold thousands of their own valuable manpower and keep them in defensive positions in the north away from their counteroffensive effort. There are more issues beyond offensive capabilities and manpower. Ukraine is facing a lack of ammunition for its artillery. Defense News reported on March 2nd that Western production of artillery shells is not high enough to meet Ukraine's usage, and they've begun to ration artillery shells just like Russia has. The Washington Post have also reported that Ukraine has also faced an acute shortage of artillery shells, which Washington and its allies have scrambled to address, with discussions about how to shore up Ukraine's stocks dominating daily meetings on the war at the White House National Security Council. NATO is reportedly rushing in ammunition for the spring offensive, so it's likely to be less of a problem for the primary thrust, but we will have to wait and see if they have enough shells that will arrive in time to support the opening of a second front. To ensure the success of the main offensive in Zaporizhzhia, Ukraine will need to carefully consider whether launching a diversionary offensive is worth the potential loss of men and resources. The question that arises is whether Ukraine possesses the necessary offensive capacity to accomplish such an ambitious goal. In terms of manpower, Ukraine will need as many experienced men as they can muster without weakening other areas of the front line too significantly. In the Kherson counteroffensive, The Economist estimated that Ukraine engaged around 20,000 to 25,000 Russians, with some estimates ranking even higher. This can give us some idea of the amount of men Ukraine will need to take and secure Zaporizhzhia. We could maybe expect 30 to 50,000 men are needed. However, this is a rough estimate that is only meant to demonstrate that the scale of the offensive is massive. Beyond numbers, Ukraine needs their soldiers to be sufficiently trained and experienced. Due to the war losses, Ukraine is starting to see more green troops deployed on the front lines. For example, Ukrainian Lieutenant Colonel in Washington Post article claimed that he was the sole professional left out of his battalion of 500. Raw recruits are much less effective in combat, whether you're talking about Ukraine or Russia. Ukraine has reportedly been promised 130 modern tanks in the first wave of delivery. Unfortunately, due to the time taken to train and deliver these vehicles, we might expect only 2 to 3 battalions to be ready for a spring offensive, and there's only about 40 tanks per battalion. These are not only tanks Ukraine has though. It'll likely be a few hundred T-60s, T-72s, and upgraded T-72Ss from pre-war stockpiles, Western allies, and those captured from Russia. Although this tank force is relatively few in numbers, if concentrated, it could help break the Russian lines if supported correctly. In terms of support, you have to look at air defense systems. Ukraine's land-based SAM batteries have been essential in helping them limit the effectiveness of the Russian Air Force. Beyond protecting the wider infantry task force with an air umbrella, Ukrainian air defenses will need to provide an extra level of protection to Ukraine's armored core. This is because Russia will likely seek to eradicate the few Western tanks Ukraine possesses, as they know they will take time to replace, and that they are likely Ukraine's most potent offensive unit. Air defense systems will need to be able to be kept up with tank forces in the event of a breakthrough, and if they cannot, it may lead to slower progress or unnecessary losses. To protect its logistics, Russia may consider dispersing their ammunition dumps, which are vulnerable to HIMARS artillery attacks. But trucks can only cover so much ground in a single day, so that would limit the amount of ammunition Russia could bring to their front lines. In an ideal situation, Russia might protect their dumps with concentrated air defenses. Western intelligence sharing has also made HIMARS very effective at locating ammunition depots. Russia will need to figure out a way to limit the threat of these HIMARS systems has on their logistics, particularly ammunition dumps, if they're able to fully supply their frontline forces and essential artillery pieces. It's likely that Ukraine will launch an offensive this spring. On the other hand, Russia has a reasonable chance of repelling such an offensive. But it is dependent on whether they can muster enough forces in the area to exploit their military advantages. The outcome remains uncertain, and only time will tell whether Ukraine's offensive will succeed. Some of you have commented, noticing how I've doubled the amount of videos I produce each month, and the quality of the animations and research has increased. We're investing more into the content creation for you, and one of the ways we're able to do this is by you guys joining the members only section of the YouTube channel. I've put a link in the description. I offer exclusive monthly videos that are probably too spicy to post to the public. There are unique emojis, access to our scripts, and I'm really surprised how many of you have joined so far. We also have a new FUBAR and Grill t-shirt available that also helps support the content if you're interested. You guys are the first 1 million subscribers in the Spare Parts Army, and I look forward to bringing you even better rundowns in the future with your support.